Good afternoon, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. It's very nice of you. Okay, so Generation Z, reach, engage, inspire is what we're going to be talking about. So maybe I'll just give you some context so you know, thank you for the introduction, but so you know a bit more about what we're going to talk about, and I'll introduce myself in a moment. So we're going to talk a bit about search trends, particularly the search trends that we're seeing from Generation Z. We're going to talk about what's important to them, particularly when we're talking about them selecting their university for undergraduate or postgraduate studies. And then we'll talk about key takeaways. And I'm going to try very hard to leave enough time for some questions at the end so we can have some good engagement going on. So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't introduce a little bit about Mintwist and about myself. So I'll start off with myself. So I'm co-founder of Mintwist, which is a digital agency. I feel very closely connected to the higher education sector because I really like it. I think you guys are really nice. But I also act as a visiting lecturer for City University of London on their digital marketing short courses. So actually, myself and my colleagues wrote those courses, and we act as visiting lecturers on Saturday mornings, which I absolutely love doing, working with lovely people, and I actually genuinely do love it. Mintwist themselves is a full-service digital agency. It's an independent digital agency, and as independents go, it's been around for quite a while now. We're based in London, but we work extensively in overseas markets. It's a big part of what we do. We do have clients in the HE sector, and targeting, running student recruitment campaigns in overseas markets is a fairly significant amount of the work that we do. So there are some HE companies up there, as well as the large businesses. We work with lots of small SME and growth businesses in particular. So before we get going into the bulk of the presentation, we've got time for a live poll. So I'm reliably informed that if you do whatever you need to do, apologies, I wasn't here this morning, so I don't know exactly how it works, but you can get some answers to these questions. So, which digital marketing activity do you feel will be most important for your organization for the next 2 years? And we are talking really about student recruitment here, as opposed to comms in a more generic sense. So, for marketing your organization, for recruiting students, is it email marketing automation, social media advertising, search marketing, video marketing, or influencer marketing? What do we think will be most important for your organization going forward in the near term? I think if I press this green button, I'm going to get results. So let me just, the result, I didn't press the button and they come up. Magic. Okay. Nearly half of us are saying that social media advertising is going to be very important. A minority of people are saying search marketing, and we've got 23% saying video marketing and influencer marketing. Now, it's very clear to me, given those results, that you guys have your fingers on the pulse. You know where a lot of these trends are going. So in the next few slides, I think I'm going to be speaking to people who kind of already got a good idea of what's going on. Because social media clearly, especially when we're talking about Gen Z, is clearly a very, very important channel. Video is a very important play. And actually this whole concept of influencer marketing, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, is very, very much in play, and it's very important to Generation Z. The point I'll make just before we move on though, and obviously as an agency, we are a marketing agency. We call ourselves a digital marketing agency, but the truth about marketing in 2017 is there is no disconnect between digital marketing and real world marketing. It's just marketing. And actually when we talk about recruiting students, so 16 and 17-year-olds making a decision about where they're going to take their undergraduate, where they're going to study for their undergraduate degree, or where undergraduates are going to go for their postgraduate degrees, we're actually talking about a decision-making journey that's going to touch quite a number of channels. And at the start of that decision-making journey, when you're, in my day, it was lower sixth form or year 11, 12, year 12, when you're at that point in the process, you're going to be doing research probably not based on the city, on the university's websites or even their own profiles, and you'll be using things like social media, you'll be using things like your friends to find out about the different types of institutions that you can go to. And as they move through the buying cycle, as they become closer to the point at which they're going to shortlist initially a number of institutions and then ultimately make a decision, we find that different channels and different digital tools and tactics come into play. So, long way of making the point that all of these channels ultimately are going to be important, and it's the way that they connect together, and we, or those of us in the room that are responsible for or influencing student recruitment, we just need to understand that that's a journey, it's a decision-making process that our prospects are going to go through, and we just need to understand where these types of tools and tactics fit in with that decision-making process. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about search trends, and we're talking in the context of Generation Z here. I'm pretty sure everyone in the room is familiar. Generation Z, there's probably loads of different definitions out there, but in general, we're talking 16 to 24-year-olds. Okay? So Mintwist, along with some partners in the industry, did an extensive amount of research on this group. And in particular, we're looking at what their behavior during the selection process for undergraduate and postgraduate courses. And when we look at what we see in this group in particular, it is, as I was touching on earlier, it's a protracted research phase across multiple devices and multiple channels. This group, certainly unlike my generation and probably unlike most of the generations above them, they do actually, there is tangible evidence to say that they value online sources of information above offline sources of information. 62% of them are researching universities on a smartphone. Okay, and obviously a massive amount of them own a smartphone. I'm surprised it's not a bigger number, frankly. Okay, so when we looked at the search queries for the phrase UCAS clearing, if you go back to 2013, you see it was 30% who are making this search on a smartphone. That number rose in 2014, it's risen again, And the point here is that it's 48%, it's nearly 50%, but the trend is continuing, and we expect in the near future this to be, the vast majority of searches will be on a smartphone, which clearly has implications. Okay, similar set of results for undergraduate course, a slightly lower number, but it's still trending up, and it shows no sign of abating. Again, postgraduate courses, slightly older group of individuals that will be making this type of search. Therefore, the trend is the younger generation are really into smartphones. The ones slightly above them are into them. People my age may or may not be, but there's a trend that's moving across here, and the trend is not going to stop. And I've been working in digital. I'm 42 years old, and I feel like, in a way, I'm sad about that because I'm the wrong side of 40. But in a way, I'm quite happy about that because I was at the age when I started getting into computers completely pre-internet, and I was one of these techie guys who got into computers when computers weren't very particularly accessible. So I've seen the pre-internet world and the post-internet marketing world, if you like. And what I've seen as I've sort of grown older is that the trends that are being driven by the younger generations, they tend to be the trends that the technology companies and the software companies will look to leverage, and therefore they imply trends in the older age groups as well. Okay. So it's a trend. The other thing that's going on is this thing about voice search, which is actually a kind of a component of so-called cloud AI. So Hands up in the room, just out of interest, hands up in the room if you use voice search on your smartphones. It's actually a really impressive number. You guys are obviously a really progressive group. Normally you see a smaller number there. So it's a minority, but the people are doing it. Generation Z are doing it in quite large numbers. Now, and at the moment, the technology is kind of sitting in the background, but without a shadow of a doubt, the smartphone technology companies and the companies that are behind the software that are driving the way that we interact with those smartphones, they see this as the future, and they're certainly looking to leverage this. And as it becomes more and more naturally used by those in the room that are using it and other people, we'll start to see it become more front and center. So what's the implications to us as people who are interested in using marketing and doing student recruitment? What it means is this type of search is going to replace the type of search that you might type into a search engine, whether you're on a laptop or even your mobile phone. And the search is more semantic, it's more natural, the language is more natural. So that's a trend that's been occurring in search in general since search has been a thing. But actually, once we get this flip into the significant amount of this type of voice-activated search and personal assistant activated search, we're going to see quite a big job for people like us, digital agencies who are helping clients to capture this type of search. We're going to have to switch the way we think, and we're going to have to switch the way that we respond to a search like this, and what type of content we want to show. Okay. So what's important to Gen Z? It's this authenticity thing. Gen Z, like a lot of us, to be fair, going forward, but this generation are absolutely drawn towards real groups of people revolving around brands as opposed to a brand and a label itself. So they want to connect with authentic messages, real messages, and ideally messages that are about people as opposed to, and to a lesser extent, the brands. Okay, the other thing that's very important to them is their instant messaging apps, their social networking apps. So there is, without a shadow of a doubt, there is a trend, away from email, traditional email, away from texting, towards instant messaging apps, things like WhatsApp and others, and towards things like Facebook Messenger and social networking in general. I think there's a number of reasons for that. It's definitely a Gen Z thing, but there's also, when I speak to sort of peers and people who work in all sorts of industries, there's definitely a perception that email is becoming a very crowded and somewhat inefficient place, which is probably also playing into this trend. But it is a trend, and yet again, it's an increasing trend. It's not something that's staying static. These numbers are likely to continue to grow. Okay, so a few minutes left. Let's talk. So I mentioned we worked with the HE sector. City University of London is one of the clients that we've been fortunate enough to work with over the last sort of 4 years. So obviously, the way that we work with our clients, we look to draw in these insights and help them to position themselves to take advantage of them. So making your websites mobile responsive, I'm pretty sure everyone in the room is familiar with what that means. So making them mobile friendly and accessible over the mobile is really, really important. For those institutions that have very large websites that are built up over many years with thousands or tens of thousands of pages, this actually is a relatively big job. What City did quite well was to pick out the key templates, transform those, and kind of work in a kind of piecemeal way. So they ended up with this environment where the key pages were optimized for obviously still desktop and laptop, but also tablet and mobile. And what you're really looking to do here is pick out the pages where they're going to be accessed on a smartphone. So if you're creating marketing content and pushing out via email marketing or social media, those two channels are even Gen Z aside, are overwhelmingly going to be interacted with on the smartphone. So For those of you who voted in the poll for video, you're absolutely right. Video's a tool that's very important, especially for Gen Z. Facebook advertising. When you talk about Facebook advertising, it's synonymous with smartphone advertising, because as we just touched on, the vast majority of users, especially Gen Z, are using Facebook on their smartphone. It almost certainly won't be using on their laptops. So video Facebook advertising worked really well. Hands up in the room if you're familiar with the term remarketing or retargeting. Hands up if you're not familiar with it. Okay, right, so let me just take a minute to explain it before I talk about this example. So social media advertising is about targeting 16-year-olds that fit a particular profile that we think would be interesting to us. If we hit them when they're 16 with an advert and they come to a message that we think is quite interesting for them to consider us as they go forward and become 17-year-olds, we want to stay in touch with that potential student, because although they're not ready to select us as an institution, they were probably going to be in a position to want to shortlist us at some stage in the future, and that's implied by the fact that they connected with our ad in the first place. So remarketing and retargeting, widely used by a number of industries, including HE, is about using cookie technology. You can retarget that potential student with appropriate advertising in an appropriate way, meaning not too often and not all of the time, but in the right times of day, on the right types of channels, across channels beyond just the channel that they originally engaged with you on. So Facebook ad, student clicks on it, lands on my page. We can then run display advertising to them as they move across Google or other channels. And this type of advertising works very well for City because an initial touch with an initial ad, as I mentioned, was followed up with an invitation to an open evening of some description, i.e. a way to pull the student as they moved through the buying cycle and they went from awareness to the actual phase when they're potentially going to select an institution. It's a great time to then offer them the opportunity to come and meet with you. Okay, social media as a service. So again, as you're talking about prospects and potential students moving to the process of making the decision, i.e. when they're nearly ready to select, it's very important they want to be as responsive as possible. So responding manually on social media to questions that are posed directly to your institution is a great way of helping those students to feel good about you and to want to come and be a part of the institution. They've used social media really well to target students in China, and Weibo is the social media channel of choice for Gen Z potential students in China. So email marketing, correctly used, still works, despite what I said. If email marketing automation is very well done, there is good response rates for it, meaning if you're connecting with people who are genuinely interested and at a point when they're nearly ready to select you with the right type of information, works very well. Do we have another poll? Is that wrong or right? Shall I move on? So if we can get the, okay, I'll talk, I'll go with it. So the final section is takeaways. So the key takeaways are this, and I'm sure we'll get the slides back in a minute. The first takeaway is be social, be authentic, and be personal. So definitely communicate on the social media channels, like Instagram, like Facebook. The emerging one is Snapchat, the company is known as Snap. But when we're communicating on these channels, it's really, really important that we're doing it in an authentic and transparent, personal way. And this is where we come into influencer marketing. So the concept of influencer marketing historically was about get a big celebrity, get them to talk about you, get them to turn up at your event. When we talk about, I think it's a massive opportunity for institutions in higher education, because when you look around this room, you're all influencers for your organisations. When you look inside your organisations, there's influencers literally all over the place inside universities especially. And if we can find a way of connecting the voices of these influencers with our own messages and connecting them with prospect students, then we're going to do very, very well, because that's exactly what they're looking for. The other key takeaway is be mobile, 100% mobile, and be mobile first. So if you're going to run an initiative that's got anything to do with digital, you need to think about the mobile platform first. And connected with that, it's being AI ready, so cloud artificial intelligence, which is going to drive an increasingly large number of people who are interfacing with a smartphone via their voice. That's going to be very important too. Thank you very much for listening. I think I was nearly on time, and hopefully we've got some time for some questions from the audience. Anyone?